So we've now heard from Austria, Germany, Holland, and now we're going to hear from Belgium. And you, I think, could probably compete with Willem for the oldest orange trees that are still in cultivation. I certainly think you have some that are more than 300 years old, but we'll probably hear about that later. And you've been looking after the citrus collection at Freyr since 2009. And as well as some private citrus collections. So it might be interesting to hear the difference between a public and a private citrus collection. You've written lots of articles, done lots of research, and hopefully we're going to see some of these amazing. All right, yes, here we go. Screen sharing away. Lovely. The historic orange trees at the Castle of Freyr. So please welcome, Stefan.
Good morning, or really nearly good afternoon. I will mainly talk about the orange trees of Freyer, Freyr, spoken as we say it. I presume they're the oldest trees, or some of them are the oldest trees on the world. They may be mid-17th century, really, and we know the age of them because we lost some of the trees. So we were able to count the annual yearings. It would take me too far to talk about other orangery buildings in Belgium or specificities about it. So I will concentrate around the castle here. The castle of Freyer is still nowadays a private property, and it's situated along the river Maas, or Meuse in French. It's close to the French border in the Ardennes, and in origin, the property or the garden as you see it nowadays, and the castle was it goes back to for 600 years in the same family, but the main structure of the main modifications were made in the 18th century by the Duke de Beaufort-Pontin. In the 19th century, it was transferred to the family by female descendants, the Lobespin-Lagarde, the counts of the Lobespin-Lagarde, and in the 20th century, mid-20th century, by marriage again by female line to Baron Bonnard, and Baron Bonnard is still owning it today. And since about 20 years, there is a partnership with the foundation, the King Baudouin Foundation, who received part of the familial heritage, and they do big support, financial support in the maintenance and in the renovation of palace, castle and gardens. So here you see the garden in an old picture from I presume the 50s, because nowadays there is a ditch in front of the garden wall. You see the two old orangeries or conservation buildings. I will talk about them later. And here a picture of early 20th century, where you see the castle still chalked white, the garden, the north garden, and then here the upper garden, the lower garden, the two orangery buildings, and the whole surrounding left side of the river and the other side of the river where the castle is are part of the property. So walking around, it's nowadays you only visit the formal garden, but the wild and the rocks and the surroundings, it's all part of the appreciation of the garden. Here you see the old garden, the garden before 1770. It's an early Baroque garden. You see again those two conservatories, those two refrigerating buildings to conserve the trees. And we presume the trees were much smaller in the 18th century, late 17th century. The first trees that were mentioned, and we find in the archives, was around 1704 and 1710. And it's in those days, the count who asked a gardener to bring them out or to replace them or to put them in another position. We don't know how many trees were at the property in those days. We only have this engraving, which is quite important, the drawing, which will become the backdrop for an engraving for a book, a travel through the principal the bishopal principality of Lutich, Liège. And when we count the trees in front of the orangeries, we presume that they had around 30 trees in the around 1730, so early 18th century. There's in this book, it talks about all the abbeys and castle properties of quite a beautiful part of Belgium. There are only three mentions, three estates mentioned within Freyer, where they talk about a reasonable collection of orange trees. So this still is quite unique for the Austrian Netherlands. So in those days, we speak of Northern Netherlands, Holland already, and then the Austrian or Spanish Netherlands. Plant collecting is in the genes of it's a desire of all royal and noble properties, but really building out a citrus collection, it is quite special. It was not usual everywhere. The garden, as we see today, was drawn or worked out by the French garden designer Gallimard. It was done around 1770, and the oldest drawing we don't have the plans of it anymore. It was built out around this charcoal drawing made around 1850, and there we see the first part of the garden with the four basins, the four ponds. Then we have bleached lime garden with the central fountain, and then we have the orangery garden of the orange garden with two parterre d'orangerie around two ponds with a fountain. All fountains are on a natural pressure of the water running down the hill and canalization canalization through the garden. The garden, as it's presented today, is still in that outfit from 1770, and nowadays we will start restorations of the ponds and the lead work, the water canalization. Here on the right side on top, you see an old postcard from the early 20th century. And you see the main axis with the orange trees. The first one you see, you can really look through. And it's typical for those old pictures. They put it always their most beautiful trees in the main view, so we don't see what's on the right side. And we presume, and you will see when we will talk about the orangeries, it's not evident at all still nowadays to conserve all the trees in a perfect condition to bring them through the winter. On the bottom, you see the wooden planters, which are unique for Freyer, where they bring the trees outside with a horse. And in the background, you see on both old pictures or postcard, you see a lime, a bleached lime coverage, where the most sensible trees were put till the 60s. So when they brought out the trees early May, the trees who suffered most from overwintering in the orangeries were situated or were placed for some weeks under those lime trees. The tree you see on the old picture with the horse and with the this tree is still, you will recognize it later in the presentation, where I give a picture from a tree from 2015 to 17 and this year. So this tree is still, we know the tree is in the collection since, certainly since the 30s. So when we talk about the trees, we certainly know that some trees go back to the 17th century, but we don't know exactly if the trees were owned by the family since then. Trees were sold, or collections were often sold as a sort of important due to succession rights. And in the 19th century, we have several indications and several proves that old collections, orange collections, were sold and on the market for reasonable prices. And we presume, as different trees are grafted on different heights, that a family bought through time several trees from other places. Here you see the replanting, a picture from the 50s with a pulley which was installed in early 19th century. We presume this is found back in the archives around 1813. And here again, they drive an old orange tree inside with a horse and a carriage. When you look into the orangeries, I think you see already these buildings are very dark, and that's in opposite of other orangeries we find or early 19th century orangeries we find in Belgium, or other orangeries we find in Germany, I presume England as well. So it's not at all evident to bring these plants for about 6 months inside there. Here you see the Freyr orangeries as they are today. The biggest problem is the trees which are put inside. As these buildings go probably back to the early 18th century, and as I said in the beginning, as we presume that the trees were much smaller, only potted trees in terracotta pots or tubs cut in barrels cut in two, half a barrels. And you see the light direction on the first picture. We presume that those small trees were small enough or had light enough to overwinter in those buildings. But as through time the trees grow, and as they had to construct a pulley in the early 19th century, we presume that they introduced the big wooden planters as we have them today, early 19th, probably late 18th century, to put or to bring in those grown trees. But a new problem was created and was only solved recently. The trees didn't receive hardly any light in the background under the second vault of the orangery. A modern 19th century orangery is much higher and not so deep as those buildings from Freyer. We have a sort of building which is very thick walls, very closed. In origin, it was heated with iron stoves, cast iron stoves. So, and it's the coldest part of Belgium, is the highest part. So they've constructed buildings to ensure that cold could stay outside on a rather easy way. But I was confronted with the trees about 17 years ago, and the trees were totally yellow. It was sort of area cultivation, you would say. And it took me a whole summer every year to make them green. They passed again in those dark buildings, and they came yellow outside again. So since about 5 years, we installed under the second vault horticulture lights, the only thing we have, and they give light for about 6 hours a day, and that gives a big difference. As we see, we are able to bring the trees green outside as well early May. And I've seen it in Italy in the 19th century orangery, which was too dark as well, where they introduced it, and it brought us to the idea to install those horticultural growing lights in the back part of the orangery. And so you see on the second picture. The wooden paneled planters of Freyer, it's rather unique to see them. It's along a model drawn in the Encyclopedia of Diderot and d'Alembert, 18th century, and they personalized it in Freyer. We have several types, so you see the top of it. The head is model changes a bit through age, through time. The oldest one from 1976 are Tech planters. Nowadays we use local oak wood from the woods all around the property. They have about 600 hectares and can't calculate it immediately in acres. Woodland, so there is still a lot of wood coming from the property. Here on the bottom you see, on the left side, you see one of those oldest trees we have in the collection. And the advantage of those paneled planters is that we have to transplant, or we transplant mainly when the wooden planter is rot, and that's after about 20 years. For oak planters, then we recuperate the cast iron closing structures. But when we open the panels, we can remove every 5 or 2 or 3 years part, about 10 centimeters on two sides, and then 2 years later, 5 or to 10 centimeters on the other side. So we don't have to transplant the whole plant, the whole tree, every 5 or 10 years. So we are able to keep them in their enclosure for about nearly 20 years. We only attack or take the tree out earlier when you see, or when we appear that bigger problems, loose leaf, yellowing, we can't explain, appears on the trees. So here you see the transplanting of this old massive orange tree on the right side. Since about, I think, 6-7 years, we cultivate the plants or the trees on an organic way without pesticides, and we are able to harvest quite a nice crop yearly. And it's since about 10 years that since we reintroduced historic way of fruit pruning, as I learned it as a young boy by the neighbors, that the trees start bearing and producing fruits again. When I arrived in Freyer, people just said these are all bitter oranges. The small yellow marbles they produce, they were unedible, extremely sour and bitter. But after some years, and after some decent pruning, and it takes about half a day to sometimes a day to prune them with the secateurs, just with a hand pruning, a rose pruning secateur, like fruit trees. We've remarked that we have quite a big variety of different oranges, and you see it as well on the right picture. The trees look similar. They are pruned as a sort of gigantic bonsais in a uniform way to give a uniform appearance. And that's, for example, a difference with Versailles. They have mainly on their axis all bitter oranges, all from the same variety, several oranges, and they grow more or less all in the same speed and same dimension. But here we have slow growing cultivars, upwards growing cultivars, as the one you see, the tree you see behind the first tree on the left side. You see this growing much more upwards. But to have a visual uniform appearance, they need a rather severe pruning and a rather reflected pruning. But that's an important topic of the maintenance. But nowadays we have quite some variety in the collection, and it's quite unique, and it gives us, together with the collection of Laken, the castle of the Palace of Laken, the royal palace, I was able to make an inventory of it, and we have a quite similar variation in the collection as over there. And I think we have one of the two last European collections where you find that can give you an image or an idea of what was a 17th century orange collection, bitter orange collection in the Austrian Netherlands. So determining those old varieties, it's one of the tasks we took on us. It's quite difficult to give the real exact name, we have a very important historic publication. It's by Franciscus van Sterbeek. It was a priest. It's in Dutch. It was published in Antwerp. And we have a local focus or local naming. He refers to other historic books like Ferrari, but he gives them local names, and there are a lot of Pomo Adami, and Pomo Adami we call them Adam apples, and an Adam apple is like where they presume that Adam received the apple from Eve and put his teeth on the bottom, and then you see that a teeth reproduction of Adam. That's the idea in the bottom of the orange tree. We have bitter Adam's apples, sour, and we have really sweet tasting bitter Adam's apples in the group of sour or Seville oranges. It was very popular over here, and you see it as well in the picture of Van Eyck. The Mystic Lamb represented the altarpiece in Ghent, the cathedral, and there it's Eve who is giving by Van Eyck, and it's one of the earliest representation in modern painting, where you see in Catholic modern painting or Christian modern painting, where Eve is offering an orange, an Adam's apple, and not a classic apple, to her husband Adam, and who will bring us all to the paradise of tears till nowadays. So that's what we have, a quite large variation of those Adam's apples in the collection. Then we have the corniculata. Willem already showed them as well. We have two types of corniculata. Was very special, and they have it as well in Laken. This is the Citrus aurantium, the sweet type, and a bittersweet type, and we have 2 or 3 different sweet types. And I can't explain the taste, but I only can say when we eat a normal table orange, there is always, it's a mixture of acidity with sweet, with sugar, with the sugar taste, and those really sweet, bitter oranges, they don't have any sort of acidity. The best one, and that's subjective interpretation, that's the one for me with a very deep musky taste. Those oranges stay smaller than or they so in between an edible orange, a sweet orange, and a sort of a mandarin or a clementine, but they have a very exquisite and very strange, and what we for us nowadays unknown taste in our taste in our aroma. The disadvantage, and we presume that it were these oranges that this were delivered with the conquistador to discover the Americas, and in South American or Central American kitchen, we found those recipes, we find those oranges back as well. Here you see some of the oranges collected. You see there is quite some difference in size. Here's the 8 Meuse, it's a corniculata. 9 Meuse, it's just an ordinary sweet orange we bought recently to fill up a gap. 3 Meuse, it's Adam's apple, and you see when you look well the sort of Adam bites, the teeth of Adam on the bottom. 4 Meuse, it's a very, very sweet, extremely pure sugar without any acidity. And 10 Meuse, I have this bitter orange with a soft skin peel. So there is quite some variation in the fruit, some in color as well. Some are more orange, others say more green during the ripening process. Pruning, as I said, is very important for us. The trees have achieved nowadays their maximum height, their maximum form. So yearly, I pass about a half a day to a day on pruning each tree. And a healthy tree, I cut off about 30% of the of the foliage, and that's what you see here on a lemon tree, to bring it back in shape. That's the way it was. The lemon tree I can cut two. It's so vigorous that I have to cut it 2 times a year. Here I cut it back just before at the end of or mid-August, but normally we prune them all from mid-December till mid-February in wintertime. And the main goal is to keep the foliage outside. We keep the inside of the tree free of leaves, because in summertime the crown must dry as quick as possible when we have long periods of rain and mist and humid weather. Building out of the crown of the tree, it takes about 8 till 15 years. And the crown is during we build the crown, the tree hardly produces some, the young tree or the new tree hardly produces some fruit. That's the same operation we do when we have to prune back an old tree for reasons of health. In those cases, we as well we avoid fruit production. Here you see the tree, what you saw on the historic pictures. In 2015, this corniculata tree suffered from root rot. Just a little bit too much water in these orangeries in winter, it may affect the plants on a very severe way. We took out the plant, we took away all the old soil, and that's the old plant. The old trees were potted for ages in pure clay, so it's a very, very heavy soil. The root ball, the central root ball, is a very heavy clay soil. But we were able to save this one, and you see on the first picture that in previous ages, long time before me, they were severely cut back as well. So those trees, they didn't have the life of sweet candy and princess life. They were affected by age, by time, by wars. But by even the two world wars, the family didn't heat the castle, but they heated the orangeries. But there was a leak of garden stuff, so those trees suffered. In meanwhile, 2017, the tree recovered, started growing back, and this summer, the same tree, the crown is becoming closer, denser again. I presume it never will become a really full crown. The tree is it's one of those very old trees. You see some on the central picture. You see the marks of root rot. It gets when a central root starts rotting in. Sometimes we have to cut it away, and then you see on the bark partly dries in, and it has an effect on the tree. As those very old trees and their very particular cultivars we have, we found out, we started grafting on all the old specimen on sour orange rootstock we've bought in Spain, and nowadays we buy new rootstock from sour oranges in Italy, because it becomes quite difficult to find sour orange in the Mediterranean world, as it's very sensible to malseco and to other viral infections, and say they don't in the Mediterranean world and commercial grown or citrus centra, they avoid the growth of Citrus aurantium, the sour orange of the Pomerans, because they're afraid of, because they may spread some of those viral infections. But you see here, I grafted one a selection in 2015. The year later, the graft started to grow. And after some 8 years, this is what I have. One of those young grafts, we repotted them in wooden barrels, which were funded by the King Baudouin Foundation. And then they start to present as a young tree. They start to produce here and there some fruits to taste, because in origin I labeled each tree from the mother tree was labeled, but one of the children of the descendants of the family didn't found any better to take my labels away. So nowadays we have to taste our oranges to reconnect them with the historic trees and to relabel them with our historic plant collection. Transmitting of knowledge is as well very important. I was asked by the family about 17 years ago. Thanks to the King Baudouin Foundation, we have as well a head gardener. I live about my personal home is about 95 kilometers, so it's about 70 miles away from the castle. So I can drive every day up and back towards the property. I only go there for pruning once time a month, sometimes 2-3 days. But as there is a head gardener, and it's very important for me. He does the daily survey. When I started transmitting to him the way to prune those trees, and how I prune and how we prune and how we can keep them in condition, as well as transporting here a picture, repotting the trees, a picture from the 50s. You see if you look well, the very heavy clay soil they used in those days. Nowadays we use a mixture, and we want to come back to a historic mixture of composted leaf mold, but for that we need a better compost place, which is still missing. So we need to a place for where we can bring all our dead leaves, as we have quite a lot, to compost them and to use them 2 years later as potting compost mixed with some grit. And for the gritty mix, we use a sort of rooftop substrate, rich with volcanic grit, volcanic lava, and BIMs. And the BIMs and the lava, they bring air in the substrate, and they create a good drainage as well. And it's quite important. And what we use nowadays instead of the leaf mold, it's very fine bark from pine bark. And we have here in Belgium some big wholesale. They have the bark from 0 to 5 millimeters. So it's very thin and very fine graded bark, which composts rather easy, but not too quickly, and it ensures the acidity in our mixture. I avoid peat because the same way as in England, it's they just exploit historic peat grounds to make potting compost. But so we mix those 1/3 of fine bark, 1/3 to a little bit more of those lava substrate, the rooftop substrate, and then a little bit of wholesale potting compost with some fine clay, as Willem described in his lecture. The plants are nowadays brought inside with a forklift, as it was before with a horse and a carriage. But it's not, well, it's very beautiful for a picture, but it's not reasonable anymore, as the construction has 2 central columns to drive inside. It's easier with the modern techniques. And then another topic as well, it's contact, exchanging information. And this year or this autumn, I brought 3 or 4 plants to Hutlo. I received one of their plants, and then we tried to preserve the historic genes of Freyer on several other places. to ensure their existence, because one of the problems of Freyer is that the castle is along the river, and the last time the river was canalized for bigger ships in the 19th century, but one of the impact is that the river level of the water is much higher than in historic level, and it's very sensible to flooding. So the last flooding was early 21st century. So it means that the trees were flooded in the month of January for 1.5 meters for a few days, but that's destructive, and that's this the effect of those floodings. You still feel it nowadays. It's one of the sensibility to root rot. And here you see in the center Willem, who came visiting our trees, and then we went already several times to Hutlo. And there is as well, Claudia talked about this as well. There is Arbeitskreis Orangerien, which is very important for the Dutch or the German spoken world. And they have important publications and reunion. And here it was last September in Oranienbaum, where the head gardener is transferring his information and his experience in a Central European climate, how to deal and how to grow and how to maintain their collection. I'm also consulted for some other collections, and last spring I was contacted by Mattemburgh. Wilm showed their variegated corniculata form, which they lost, and their orange trees were in a terrible condition. And since last spring we repotted them. They have a very beautiful historic collection of orangery plants. And here you see the plants early summer, as it was still dry in July. It must be mid-July, I presume. And there you see the orange trees. We repotted them all, pruned them severely back. They weren't pruned anymore for about 10 years. The crown was higher than the planter and the stem together. They were in a terrible state, and we were able to bring them to reasonable growth back again in one growing season. I was already contacted for about six years. A very beautiful historic private castle close to Paris. They have an orange collection since 1850 in a sort of post-Napoleon concept. Most of the trees are old historic mandarin trees, one of the first from the 1880s, one of the first who were introduced in Europe. They were also yellow when I arrived there about 5 years ago. It was the year before Corona. And this is a picture from last February. And finally, I can say that the trees are quite green again. And then I have my private collection. I have a shadow collection of the trees of Freyer. Build a personal orangery to overwinter them, and that's to ensure the genes of Freyer are as well in other spots, far from the water of the river. And then if something happens, that we are able to change or to bring back one of those, for me, very important genetic trees back to his historic origins. I graft mainly as well on sour orange, and I do my personal research with other understock like Poncirus trifoliata and other stock I find back in historic research or recent scientific publications, what they inform, and I try to figure out what gives me a good result, because we must accept there is climate change, and climate change has an effect on even those trees. Sometimes we see that the trees even suffer over here from heat, long periods of summer heat, summer drought, with temperatures over 30, 35 degrees. They didn't have it in the 17th, 18th or 19th century, but these are common nowadays. So we must cope with those things. I hope you enjoyed my speech. For me as well, it's important to, if I give a lecture, of try to inform people about these oranges, and they had a historic use. It were not only ornamental plants; they were used in recipes. We have quite a lot of historic written publications and castle inventories where those fruits and flowers were used in recipes. So I try uh, to make it more visual, as Claudia's does it as well, or they do it as well in Vienna with the citrus days, to let people taste how those historic fruits may taste in your own mouth. And I think it's very important to show it, or to bring it to people. And well, I hope that I unveiled something from one place in Belgium, of those golden apples that Hercule keeps in his hand. And here my last picture is a summer picture of the castle garden of Freyer. Nowadays, on the right side, you see the around the ponds, you see the orange trees. We have placed for about 44 trees. And yeah, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stefan. That was absolutely fantastic. Quick question from me. There's quite a lot of questions that I need to ask, and I know we've overrun into lunchtime. So I hope people are happy. We'll carry on. It is being recorded, so if you need to go, you can get it on the recording. But and Freya, is the castle open to the public?
The castle is open to the public. In summer times, we are open every day except Monday. During the year, you can make a reservation. There is a website, Freyer, Castle of Freyer, or Chateau de Freyer. If you type Freyer, I think with Google will help you. And there is an English translation. Yeah, so you can visit it. And from the after season, so spring and autumn, we're open in the weekends.
Okay, that's
So we,
fantastic.
and then there is, and you can, there is, and then we're working on better audio guides. So it's a permanent process of yes, it's thanks to about 10 years that the King Baudouin Foundation is investing. Before it was only the family, and it's maintained by what the woodland and the rented farmland brings in, but that's only a limited budget. So and tourists, they bring €7 or €10, so it stays as well a limited income. And the cost of such a property, it's huge. So thanks to the King Baldwin Foundation, we're able to yearly to invest bigger sums in better restoration and receiving people in a more informing way.
Okay, so I think I'll just ask you some of these practical questions that have come in. So, do you treat the inside of the oak pots in some way, and how many drain holes are in the bottom, and how big are the drainage holes?
I Yes, something I forgot. The oak is burned, so we burn those like the whole the planters, the half barrels. We order them by a local barrel or planter maker, half barrel maker. And we burn them inside. So we really charcoal is impermeable to water, and once you burn, we have coal wood. It has a name in English.
Uh,
Charcoal.
charcoal.
No, it's not charcoal. We call it coal wood or so. Cold. Once the wood is cold from inside, water can't come in. So it gives us a protection, and the best way is to burn them, because before older planters, nowadays we use wood for the wooden planters, the big square wooden planters from the property. But before, we ordered wooden planters from, I think they came from Poland, and they were painted. And paint, just with the humidity, it's detached, and then it starts rotting quite quickly. So just burning them inside and painting them outside.
Okay, and the holes in the bottom, how many and how big?
There are quite some holes in the bottom, but it's important as well to say, when you have your historic root ball, and sometimes you've seen them. I don't know if you remember the Vienna presentation. In Vienna, their wooden barrels are very undeep, and you have your historic root ball. You can't make the roots, they won't grow much deeper anymore. We have planters which are about 1 meter high, and then I put, when I have only a root ball which is about 20 or 25 centimeters deep, a half, what is 2 feet or feet and a half deep, I have to put bricks on the bottom, and that ensures my drainage. It's useless to bring a lot of potting soil on the under the root ball, because that is just the base of root rot. It stay humid and wet during winter time, and then the humidity goes to upwards and start rotting the roots, and that's can affect a very quickly very negative effect. But
Yes.
the holes, it's there must be 20, 30 holes in the wooden planches.
Really? Okay. And another one about the pots. If you can't open the sides of your wooden container, how would
Mhm.
you advise lifting out the lemon tree to prune the roots in order not to harm it? I,
It all depends on the size of the pot.
Nice.
We have a
Yes.
pulley, and in Mattenburg we work with a forklift, and then with an very old, thick wooden blanket. It was wrapped around, and then we were gently pulled up the tree. But when you have medium large trees, and you have stone pots, you can put them to the side on a thick wooden blanket, and then gently, first of all, you just make your potting soil around the border. You lose it, you make it soft, and then you pull out gently your. That's what I do with my personal plants. I just put them to their side, make my potting soil first, detach a little bit from the border, and then you pull it out gently. Then you work, you loosen your roots, and then repot your plants in quite often in the same pot. I don't grow for free. We can't grow anymore with our planters, hardly, because they become too heavy for the forklift. Their weight is about 1,001 ton already, so we are limited in space and limited in weight and height. So we are on our limits. So we need to keep them and fix their situation more or less.
Okay, very good. And somebody has asked, it was Avril, what is the regular feed that you use? Is it a foliar feed or a liquid feed?
I tried. I use a liquid feed which was established in California. It's quite important because historically they uses dried blood of, but it's too rich in phosphate. And I remarked that orange trees are very sensible. I lose sensible for phosphates and high rates of phosphates. Phosphates are root stimulating, but orange trees and are from Asia, and all Chinese plants as azalea and rhododendrons are very sensible to a high phosphate level in their potting compost. So I use a specific liquid fertilizer nowadays, uh, with the low phosphate composition, especially for orange trees. And in early season, as we have dark situations, they always come out a little bit yellower than I prefer. I give them a foliar um, nutrient with um, a high iron, soluble iron composition, and that bring them green in about 2 or 3 weeks.